Welcome to WWO Heroic Tales, where true stories of courage, sacrifice, and extraordinary heroism come alive from the darkest days of World War II. Join us as we uncover the untold moments that shaped history. May 1945. The Third Reich, a monstrous empire built to last 1,000 years, is in its death throes. Across Europe, the machinery of war is grinding to a halt, choked by the Allied advance from both west and east. Adolf Hitler is dead, Berlin is a smoldering ruin, and the chain of command has shattered into a million pieces. Yet in the remote, snow-capped mountains of the Austrian Tyrol, pockets of fanaticism refuse to surrender. Here, amid breathtaking alpine vistas, the war is not yet over. This region was rumored to be the heart of the so-called National Redoubt, a mythical fortress complex from which the Nazi regime would make its final, apocalyptic stand. While the redoubt itself was pure propaganda, the sentiment was real. Thousands of Waffen-SS troops, the most ideologically committed and brutal of Hitler's soldiers, retreated into these valleys, ready to fight and die for a lost cause. Perched on a hill overlooking the village of Itter, Schloss Itter, or Castle Itter, stands as a silent witness to the chaos. A medieval fortress repurposed over the centuries, it had become one of the Reich's most unusual prisons. It was not a place for common criminals or political dissidents, but a gilded cage for VIPs. Behind its thick stone walls were some of the most prominent figures of France's fallen Third Republic. The guest list included two former prime ministers, Edouard Daladier and Paul Reynaud, former commanders-in-chief of the French armed forces, Maxime Weygand and Maurice Gamelin, and other high-profile personalities, including a tennis star and a trade union leader. They were valuable pawns, held by the SS under the direct authority of Heinrich Himmler. As the American 12th Armored Division pushed deeper into Austria, the castle's SS guards, sensing the inevitable, abandoned their posts, leaving the French prisoners in a dangerous limbo. They were free, yet trapped. The surrounding forest swarmed with die-hard SS units who viewed them not as prisoners, but as high-value targets to be eliminated before they could be liberated. In the nearby town of Gangl, Wehrmacht Major Joseph, Sepp, Gangl commanded a small unit of German soldiers. Gangl was the archetype of a professional soldier, a decorated veteran of the campaigns in France and the Eastern Front. He had seen the horrors of the regime firsthand, and his loyalty to the Nazi cause had long since evaporated. The senseless destruction, the fanaticism of the SS, and the impending doom of his nation weighed heavily on him. He had already established contact with the local Austrian resistance, led by a mayor, and was actively working to save the town from further bloodshed by surrendering to the approaching Americans. Gangl was a man caught between his oath and his conscience. Disobeying orders was treason, punishable by immediate execution, but following them meant participating in a final, pointless slaughter. He chose conscience. Miles away, leading the charge of the American 12th Armored Division, was Captain John Jack Lee Jr., a confident, sometimes brash but capable officer. Lee commanded a company of Sherman tanks. His mission was simple: push forward, destroy enemy resistance, and take territory. For Lee and his men, the war was a clear-cut conflict between good and evil. Every German soldier was the enemy. The nuances of dissent within the Wehrmacht were unknown and, frankly, irrelevant. Their job was to defeat the German army, not to negotiate with it. These two men, from opposing sides of a world war, were on a collision course. One was a disillusioned German officer, looking for a way to salvage some honor from the ruins of his country. The other was a determined American tanker focused on finishing the fight. Neither could possibly imagine that their paths were about to cross in one of the most surreal and improbable events of the entire war, an event that would force them to question the very meaning of friend and foe. Inside Castle Itter, the French prisoners faced a terrifying predicament. The SS had vanished, but the threat had only intensified. Their former commandant, Sebastian Wimmer, had been replaced by an SS officer who had fled as well, but not before the prisoners, sensing opportunity, had begun to arm themselves with abandoned weapons. The castle's cook, a Yugoslavian resistance member named Zvonimir Chuchkovic, understood their peril. He knew that the SS would return not to guard them but to execute them. A desperate plan was hatched. Under the cover of darkness, Chuchkovic slipped out of the castle on a bicycle, carrying a letter from the prisoners pleading for Allied help. His destination was the nearest town, Wergel, about 8 kilometers away. Pedaling through the tense, hostile countryside, he was a man on a life-or-death mission. In Wergel, he didn't find the Americans. Instead, he found Major Sepp Gangl. Chuchkovic delivered the urgent message. Gangl was now faced with an impossible choice. He commanded only a handful of men who, like him, had decided to defy the Nazi regime's fight-to-the-last-man orders. They were hopelessly outnumbered and outgunned by the SS units still roaming the area. A direct assault on the castle was suicide. An attempt to defend it was equally doomed. Yet, to do nothing meant condemning the French VIPs to death. Gangl knew there was only one option, as dangerous as it was unthinkable. He had to find the Americans. He made the decision to drive his Kübelwagen, a German military vehicle, under a white flag of truce toward the American lines. This was an act of supreme courage. He could be shot on sight by suspicious GIs, or he could be captured and executed as a traitor by any SS patrols he encountered. With a heavy heart but firm resolve, Gangl drove towards the sound of the approaching American advance, hoping to find an officer who would listen before it was too late. The reconnaissance patrol from the American 23rd Tank Battalion was cautious as it scouted the outskirts of the town of Kufstein. Suddenly, a German Kübelwagen appeared, bouncing down the road and flying a large white flag. The GIs tensed, their hands on their Mohn Garans and Thompson submachine guns. This close to the end, no one was taking chances. The vehicle stopped and out stepped a German major. It was Sepp Gangl. He had found his unlikely saviors. He was brought before the unit's commander, Captain Jack Lee. The scene was surreal. A decorated Wehrmacht officer stood before a battle-hardened American tanker, laying out an incredible story. He spoke of a medieval castle, high-profile French prisoners, and the imminent threat of an SS extermination squad. At first, Lee was deeply skeptical. It could be a trap, a classic ambush tactic. His orders were to advance, not to go on rogue rescue missions based on the word of an enemy officer. But something in Gangl's demeanor, his earnest desperation, struck a chord. Lee was a maverick, known for acting on his gut. He radioed his headquarters for permission to mount a rescue, but the connection was poor, and the situation was too fluid for bureaucracy. He had to make a command decision, and he had to make it now. Lee made a choice that would define his military career. He agreed to help. He assembled a small force, 2 of his Sherman tanks, a handful of infantry, and his own command crew. He told Gangl to gather his men. The journey to Castle Itter was one of the strangest convoys of the war. Captain Lee's Sherman M4, nicknamed besieged, led the way, its 75 cannon a potent symbol of American power. Behind it rumbled a second Sherman and a truck of GIs, followed by Major Gangl and his German soldiers in their own vehicles. American and German troops, mortal enemies just hours before, were now driving together through hostile territory on a shared mission. They were a band of brothers, forged by circumstance, heading into a battle against the last remnants of a dying evil. As the improbable relief force arrived at Castle Itter, the scale of their challenge became clear. The castle was formidable, with thick medieval walls and a commanding view of the valley. But it had one critical vulnerability: a single large gatehouse at the entrance. This would be the focal point of any attack. The defenders were a motley crew, a microcosm of the war's chaos. There were 14 American soldiers under Captain Lee. There were about 10 German Wehrmacht soldiers loyal to Major Gangl. A few Austrian resistance fighters had also joined the cause. And then there were the French prisoners themselves. Although some, like General Gangl, refused to participate, others, like the fiery Paul Reynaud and the tennis star Jean Boratra, eagerly took up arms, ready to fight for their lives. The atmosphere inside the walls was thick with a nervous energy. American GIs and German Lancer, who had spent years trying to kill each other, now shared ammunition, pointed out fields of fire, and worked together to fortify the castle's defenses. Language barriers were overcome with hand signals and shared urgency. Major Gangl, with his intimate knowledge of German tactics, helped Captain Lee position their meager forces. Lee, in turn, made a critical tactical decision. He ordered his Sherman tank, besieged, to be parked directly in front of the main gate. It would act as a stationary pillbox, its powerful cannon and machine guns covering the only approach. It was a risky move. The tank was now a static, high-value target, but it was their single most powerful defensive asset. Inside, the French VIPs, clad in civilian clothes but clutching rifles, took up positions at the windows. Soldiers checked their weapons one last time, the distinctive ping of an Garand clip being loaded, the solid clack of a bolt on a German Kar 98,000 rifle. They were a tiny garrison, fewer than 40 defenders in total, preparing to face a force of over 150 battle-hardened Waffen-SS troopers. As dawn broke on May 5, 1945, A tense silence fell over the castle. They were ready. The only question was when the attack would come. The attack began not with a roar, but with a whisper. A few probing shots from the woods, the sharp crack of Mauser rifles echoing across the valley. The SS were testing the castle's defenses, trying to draw fire and identify the defenders' positions. The small garrison held its discipline, returning fire sparingly. Captain Lee and Major Gangl moved along the ramparts, coordinating the defense, shouting encouragement in two different languages. The initial probes quickly escalated. The SS, under the command of Obersturmbannführer Georg Bachmann, realized the castle was not undefended. They brought up their infamous MG-42 machine guns, whose blistering rate of fire, often called Hitler's buzzsaw, ripped into the ancient stone walls, sending chips of rock flying like shrapnel. The defenders were forced to keep their heads down, peering through arrow slits and over battlements to get shots off. The SS began to advance in disciplined squads, using the terrain for cover. But their approach was channeled towards the main gate, right into the killing zone covered by the Sherman tank, besieged. The tank's 30 caliber machine guns opened up, mowing down the exposed SS troopers. Its main 75 gun fired canister shots, turning the cannon into a giant shotgun that shredded enemy formations. The initial SS assault faltered, broken by the tank's immense firepower. The fighting was fierce and personal. From the castle's keep, one of the French prisoners, the athletic tennis player Jean Boratra, accepted a dangerous mission. He vaulted over the wall, sprinted across an exposed courtyard under fire, and climbed a parapet to act as a spotter, relaying SS positions back to the defenders. His courage inspired the others. The SS, repulsed but not defeated, regrouped. They knew they had to eliminate the Sherman tank. It was the linchpin of the castle's defense. The battle for Castle Itter was just beginning, and its fate hung on the resilience of a single American tank and the strange band of soldiers defending it. The SS were professionals. Thwarted by the Sherman, they adapted their tactics. Mortar rounds began to arc high over the walls, exploding in the courtyard and forcing the defenders to seek cover. The psychological pressure mounted with each deafening blast. Then came the weapon the defenders had feared most. The SS maneuvered a deadly 8.8 cm flak gun into position, a cannon renowned for its ability to destroy any Allied tank. From a concealed spot on a nearby hill, it took aim at besieged. The first shot was a near miss, screaming past the turret and exploding against the castle wall. The tank crew knew they were in a duel to the death. They traversed the turret, firing high-explosive rounds toward the 88's suspected location, desperately trying to suppress it. But the 88 was too well hidden. The second shot was a direct hit. A massive clang echoed through the valley as the shell slammed into the Sherman's hull. The armor held, but the tank was rocked by the impact, its systems damaged. Smoke began to fill the interior. Another shell struck, this time disabling the main gun. Besieged was crippled. Under a hail of small arms fire, the American crew bilayed out, scrambling back to the relative safety of the castle gate. The loss of the tank was a catastrophic blow. The defenders had lost their heaviest weapon and their mobile pillbox. The main gate was now dangerously exposed. The SS intensified their attack, sensing weakness. Waves of infantry charged, supported by machine gun and mortar fire. The defenders' ammunition, already low, began to dwindle at an alarming rate. Lee and Gangl ordered their men to fire only at confirmed targets. Every bullet had to count. The battle devolved into a desperate siege. The air was thick with the smell of cordite and dust. The constant chatter of machine guns and the crack of rifles was punctuated by the crump of mortar explosions. The small garrison was completely cut off, fighting for their lives against an enemy determined to overrun their position and leave no survivors. As the siege wore on, the castle walls offered protection, but also created blind spots. The fighting became a deadly game of cat and mouse, with defenders moving from window to window, trying to gain an angle on the advancing SS troops. The French prisoners, many of them aging politicians and generals, fought with a courage born of desperation. They reloaded weapons for the soldiers, tended to the wounded, and even took up rifles themselves to fire at the enemy. Amid the chaos, a moment of selfless heroism would seal the tragic fate of the battle's architect. Former French Prime Minister Paul Reynaud, caught up in the intensity of the fight, left a protected position and ran out into an open area, trying to get a better vantage point. Major Sepp Gangl, positioned on the ramparts nearby, saw the danger immediately. Reynaud was completely exposed to SS snipers hidden in the trees below. Without a second thought for his own safety, Gangl yelled a warning and sprinted towards the politician. He reached Reynaud and physically shoved him back towards cover. In that exact instant, the sharp, distinct crack of a sniper's rifle echoed from the hillside. A single bullet struck Major Gangl in the head, killing him instantly. He fell at the feet of the man he had just saved. The German officer who had defied his own high command risked everything to forge an alliance with his enemies, and masterminded the castle's defense was gone. A stunned silence fell over the nearby defenders. The man who had brought them all together had made the ultimate sacrifice. His death was a devastating blow to morale, but it also hardened the resolve of the remaining men. They were no longer just Americans, Germans, and French. They were the defenders of Castle Itter, and they would honor Gangl's sacrifice by fighting to the very last. They would not let his death be in vain. The battle for the castle had now been consecrated in blood, and the defenders prepared for the final onslaught. By 4 o'clock in the afternoon, the situation was beyond critical. Ammunition was almost completely gone. The defenders were down to their last few clips for their rifles and belts for the machine guns. The SS, sensing victory, prepared for their final, all-out assault. They had successfully planted a charge at the base of the massive wooden doors of the gatehouse. A massive explosion would soon blow the entrance wide open, allowing them to storm the castle. Captain Lee knew they were at the end of their rope. He gave the final, grim order. Once the gate was breached, they would fall back to the castle's central keep, a stone tower that was their last defensible position. From there, they would fight to the last man. It was a suicide pact, but surrender to the vengeful SS was not an option. Hope, however, had not been entirely extinguished. Earlier in the day, Captain Lee had dispatched a brave volunteer, the tennis player Jean Boratra, on another perilous mission. Using his athletic prowess, Boratra had scaled the castle wall, dropped into the woods, and posing as a local, bluffed his way through the SS lines to deliver an urgent message to the nearest American unit. But hours had passed with no sign of help. As the defenders took up their final positions in the keep, the air crackled with anticipation. The moment of truth had arrived. The SS were massing for the final charge. The defenders braced themselves, their knuckles white as they gripped their nearly empty weapons. And then, through the cacophony of battle, a new sound emerged. It started as a low rumble, a vibration felt through the stone floor. It grew louder, clearer. It was the distinct sound of tank treads, many of them, and the familiar, heavy chatter of American 50 caliber machine guns. Over the ridge, a column of American armor appeared. It was the 142nd Infantry Regiment, the relief force Boratra had reached. They had arrived in the nick of time. The arrival of the 142nd Infantry Regiment was the cavalry charge from a Hollywood film made real. The SS, poised for their final victory, were caught completely by surprise. They were now trapped between the castle's defenders and a vastly superior American force. Panic erupted in their ranks. The hunter had become the hunted. The disciplined SS units dissolved as American tanks and infantry swept through their positions, their machine guns cutting down those who resisted and forcing the rest into a full-scale retreat. The battle for Castle Itter was over. A profound silence, broken only by the crackling of a few small fires, descended upon the battlefield. Slowly, cautiously, the defenders emerged from the battered castle. They were a vision of exhaustion and grime. Americans, Germans, Austrians, and French, their faces blackened with gunpowder, their uniforms torn. The tension of the hours-long siege melted away, replaced by an overwhelming sense of relief. In a moment that would have been unimaginable just 24 hours earlier, American GIs shook hands with Wehrmacht soldiers. They shared cigarettes and water from their canteens, brothers in arms forged in the crucible of combat. The French VIPs, now truly free, expressed their profound gratitude to their strange collection of saviors. The cost had been high. The castle was scarred by bullets and shell fire. The knocked-out shell of besotten Jenny stood as a monument to the fierce fighting. And the sole fatality among the defenders, Major Joseph, Sepp Gangl, lay as a testament to the ultimate sacrifice. His body was carried out with honor by both German and American soldiers. In the aftermath, Captain Jack Lee was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross for his extraordinary heroism and leadership. Major Gangl was honored posthumously by the Austrian government as a national hero, with a street in Wehrmacht named after him. The Battle of Castle Itter, which took place just 3 days before victory in Europe Day, remains a unique footnote in the history of the Second World War. It was a moment when the rigid lines of enmity blurred, replaced by a shared humanity and a common fight against fanaticism. It serves as a powerful reminder that even in the midst of the most brutal conflict in human history, choices matter, And honor is not defined by the uniform one wears, but by the actions one takes. Thank you for joining WWWO Heroic Tales. Through the stories of brave souls from World War II, we honor their memory and keep their legacy alive for history and generations to come.